pubs, and there were brownies, and there were masses of people, a huge audience, and babbling away. You could hear it backstage, this hubbub. And so by the time we went on, I think the show was going to be an anticlimax. They were so excited. And there would be that wonderful hush, and I'd get the cue, and I'd say, it's Friday, it's 5 to 5, and it's Crackerjack. And from then on, it was mayhem.
It was part of everybody's childhood. And I think at the time it was the best children's light entertainment programme there's ever been.
You were talking about 2 or 3 generations of people, grandparents who would be sitting with their grandchildren, and parents sitting with the children on Friday having the tea in front of the television at that particular time. And it was kind of cult viewing in a way. It was acceptable to 3 generations.
There was an innocence and yet a naughtiness about it, which was fresh and bright and appealed to the kids. They took part in it, of course. It was audience participation of the most energetic kind. And they loved it. And, of course, it spread to adults as well. The cry of Crackerjack echoed around Britain for years.
I'm Jenny Hanley, and in the next half hour, I'll be remembering Crackerjack. Yeah, that's enough of that, thank you. Crackerjack started in 1955 and ran until 1984. You can tell the age of an adult by who they best remember presenting Crackerjack. The younger ones remember Stu Francis. The ones who now have children themselves recall Ed Stewart or Michael Aspel. And if you remember Leslie Crowther and Eamon Andrews, then you were there at the beginning. From the start, Crackerjack, which was invented by producer Johnny Downes, was steeped in the variety theatre tradition, and for most of its time was made by BBC Light Entertainment rather than the children's department. As the well-known Crackerjack format emerged with sketches, games and pop music, so too did its character, as Alan Bell, one of the show's directors, recalls.
I think there was a traditional aspect to Crackerjack. I think that there was a great deal of dignity to it. It was produced by the BBC, and Eamon Andrews brought to it the BBC image, and very stiff, upright gentleman who looked after the children. He would never ever talk down to them. He joined in with them. Boys were boys, girls were girls, and they should live a decent life.
Ready, get set, go! We did tell the ladies they could have track suits, but they prefer not to spoil the fashion. Right, pass it over as quick as you like. Wow, the ladies are winning, I ask you.
Presenter Eamon Andrews shared the Crackerjack stage with comedian Leslie Crowther, who wrote many of the sketches. His fellow performer, one of the ladies who were ladies, was Pip Hinton.
Where there's a river, there's a fish.
Where there's a wishbone, there's a wish.
They go together, so do we. Where there's you, there's me.
I was 6 months pregnant, and they used to hide me behind window boxes and things like that with flowers in them. And I always remember the crew saying, please, Pip, don't come on sideways. Well, yes, you didn't have, things were different then. You didn't have large pregnant women doing your children's series in those days. I think it was, we were just sort of coming into the 60s, the latter part of the 60s, I suppose, and women were women and men were men, and children, 10, 12, the people we were entertaining, they were innocent, I suppose, and the period changed very quickly, of course, in the 60s, and you had this explosion of freedom. And I think Crackerjack, during that period, was before the explosion, you see, really. We had all the Russians during that time, and Kennedy and all that period, you know, and the Cold War. And we did a Russian sketch where everyone was dressed up in furs and things like that, but it was just the surface. It was just the surface.
In the 60s, Crackerjack's family values and non-political stance were attracting huge audiences. Soon, it even had the royal stamp of approval.
I do remember when the Queen came to open White City. She was a little bit late, so we had to start the show. Terribly nervous about it all. Anyhow, we saw her coming along, little sort of goldy silk coat and hat. And we saw her after. And she said that Charles enjoyed the programme and that they all used to watch it together. And I did my curtsy, and I was in this pearly outfit, thousands and thousands of pearl buttons all over my jacket, my hat, my skirt, my gloves. And I remember her saying to me, "Did you sew all those on yourself?" And I had this picture of me night after night going home and sewing all these pearly buttons on.
Pip also had the approval of the public at large.
I do remember one letter which came from a British soldier in Aden who wanted me to send him a picture of me in black boots. Now, he did not stipulate what other apparel I should be wearing, but he wanted to picture me in black boots.
Are you ready? Go.
The Crackerjack pencil was probably the most treasured prize in Britain at the time. It was a fairly ordinary-looking thing in a plastic case with Crackerjack emblazoned on it. I've seen more magnificent prizes since, but it was adored and coveted. And I remember being with our producer, and a producer of another programme, an adult programme at the television centre, said, "Oh, do give me a Crackerjack pencil for my child." "Certainly not. You've got to earn it. You've got to win it."
Gently does it.
By the 70s, Crackerjack entered into a golden era. The format and the values of the show were firmly established, and as the original stars moved on to other things, fresh new talent arrived, in the shape of Don McLean.
Really, the format of the show didn't change that much from 1956 to 1980. There was a double at the beginning where Peter Glaze would start to say something and I'd walk on and interrupt him, and he'd look at me and he'd go, "McLean," and I'd say, "Yes, I had a bath this morning." And he went on from there. And then there was a game, and then there was an actual sketch which would have involved Jan Hunt as well. Then we'd have the silent movie, then another game, and then we'd have the big finale. I mean, that was wonderful training for anybody.
Talk to you about road safety. Now, how are we going to prevent all these accidents taking place on the roads? Have them in the home. Have them in the home. McLean. Yes, I had a bath this morning.
It really was a baptism of fire.
Bernie Clifton was another of Peter Glaze's comedy partners in the 70s.
We'd go into the studio on the day with props that we'd never seen, and they'd be totally wrong or non-existent or too big or they wouldn't work. And we used to actually wing it and change it. It was like training a police horse, you know. You could cope with anything on television.
And with such professionals on the show, what could possibly go wrong?
We had disasters all the while. And we had one scene where I was dressed in Lederhosen. Peter Glaze was chasing me around, and I ran into this hut. We were up in the Alps somewhere, and he lit the inevitable stick of dynamite, which we always had, threw it through the window, and there was then an explosion. Well, we'd not rehearsed this. So the explosion came, the door blew out, and the explosion had been right behind me, and I ran back onto the stage, and all the hairs on the back of my legs was alight because I was wearing these Lederhosen and socks, you know.
Oh, woe is me, woe is me! I cannot make ends meet! Oh, Jack away on the high seas! Ah! I owe 6 months' rent!
Crackerjack's longest-serving actress was Jan Hunt. Jan was all singing, all dancing, and, well, of course, all suffering.
It was a cowboy and Indian thing, and I was a wee old granny with a clay pipe in my mouth, and they started throwing boots and guns and goodness knows what blocks of wood over the scenery as if there was a battle going on. The heel of one of the boots caught me on my cheekbone, and the producer couldn't understand why they'd covered me in blood to make it look like I had been caught in the crossfire, and why they hadn't got blood on any of the other performers. And when at the end of the scene, you know, at the show actually, I had to go to hospital.
Oh, Jack, you're back!
Oh, Nellie, you're beautiful.
And we used to have a chicken on the set, and we used to find somewhere different to put this chicken. Well, you know, not pay any attention to it. There was no reference to this chicken at all, but it appeared somewhere in every scene. So if anybody was really, really looking hard, you know, they would have found this chicken appeared as many times as we did.
Despite the injuries, the chicken, and the pyrotechnics, Crackerjack's well-defined style brought the theatrical tradition of variety to children via television. Peter Glaze, the backbone of Crackerjack's comedy from its early days, came from that tradition. Ed Stewart.
He was one of the old-type vaudeville feeds, and I think that the comedians who were on there, whether it was Leslie Crowther, whether it was Don McLean or Bernie Clifton, everybody benefited from this old experience of his.
Holy folks, because today I'm going to talk to you about the wild and woolly West. Now, when did you last hear John Wayne say, "That wild and woolly vest is tickling me to death"? Yes, I washed my vest this morning.
In his own way, I think Peter was a real comedy genius, you know, because when you consider what he'd done in his time, he was the stand-in for the Crazy Gang when they were at their peak at the Victoria Palace, and they were really wicked. At the end of the show, they would hide all his clothes, and he'd be wandering around the theatre, totally exhausted, in his underwear, saying, "Help me, somebody," and then would have gone home.
Look, I'm talking about the Wild West. Oh, yeah. Where men were men, and the men who built it, men like Billy the Kid.
He just didn't age. Perhaps men don't age as much, I don't know. But Peter, I think, was the eternal schoolboy with his pebbled glasses and red cheeks, and he didn't change at all.
Jessie Jane, a lovely girl, good old Jen, and Buffalo Bill.
I mean, if he'd been born probably 30 years earlier and gone to Hollywood, he'd have been as big as Charlie Chaplin. I mean, every gesture was so visual, and you knew exactly what he was thinking just by his body movements.
He wasn't the easiest man in the world to work with. He was a little bloke, and little blokes are often difficult. He was quite pompous, but he was the most generous man I've ever met in my life. He also had this marvellous way of looking at a camera and knowing exactly what he was doing with his face.
And Buffalo Bill. Buffalo Bill.
Peter Glaze had a wonderful happy face. He also had a wonderful sad face. I mean, he'd lived a life and his whole life was in his face, you know what I mean? He used to be wonderful at portraying a sadness. And the kids never used to sort of get fidgety and think, "Oh, what a load of rubbish this is." They would come with us with the feelings that we created.
He didn't biff all the balls. He buffed all the biff. He biffed all the biff. Oh, shut up!
Crackerjack pen, well, they evolved from pencils to pens. And it's a very nice, properly marketed, properly respectable fountain pen. And I've saw it at home. And I believe it was a propelling pencil when it started with Eamon Andrews. Oh, I think they're definitely connected.
Never work with children and animals. Cubs, brownies, scouts or guides. A bit difficult on a children's programme with an invited live audience, all in uniform.
There was all that adrenaline going through you because it was a live audience, you know, and they responded brilliantly as soon as they heard that it's Friday and it's Crackerjack. They used to yell the place down.
Some children were smart asses, inevitably, you know, and made it tricky and played up. There was one little boy, though. He used to come, not in the games, but he'd lean over the balcony when we did it in the theatre and shout all the punchlines, because he came every week and knew the little sketches that were going to be done, the warm-up routines, and he would get in first and shout out the punchlines until he was invited to come to the stage door and be strangled by Peter Glaze.
The ideal age group was the end of primary school, 8, 9, 10-year-olds. They were the ideal. We got a comprehensive school from North London somewhere, and they were sort of 13, 14-year-olds, and they found out that the audience participation mics were there to pick up their reaction, so they got in groups underneath them and started shouting 4-letter words.
One of the good secrets of Crackerjack was that the film, the speeded-up film, was put on first, and the children's laughter at that was then kept for odd moments during Crackerjack. So if a gag didn't go down terribly well, they would put in part of the laughter from the film. Should I have told the world that?
I had some children from a hospital, and there was one little child who didn't have a pen, and I tore it away from my person to give, you know. I mean, I wanted the child to have one, but I thought, there goes my Crackerjack pen.
While the performers paused for breath, the Cubs and Brownies watched the film. A 5-minute, undercranked, silent movie, made earlier in the week and directed by Alan Bell.
The worst thing you could do in television at that time was to go over budget, and there was no budget. You had a cameraman, and you already had your stars. So the best thing I always found was to go to a location, look at what was there, and write the film into it. Yes, I used to just say, get me a lorry with a tail lift, or can somebody go and get me 5 washing machines? And they always got them. They were very inventive. And the wonderful thing about when people know there's no money in the budget, they all work very hard. Everybody does everything, everybody's job, and there's no demarcation.
He used to make it up. It was like, you know, you see documentaries on the early days of Charlie Chaplin and Max Sennett, where they used to go out with a camera and things would happen. I felt that we were actually reenacting those days.
The pain I went through because of Crackerjack was unbelievable. I ended up in hospital 2 or 3 times. Oh yeah, we were filming a removal men, and part of the script called for me to stand on a set of library steps, which were sort of triangular type steps, and they were on wheels, and to scoot them down the garden path, land on the handlebars of a policeman's bike, and the policeman then drove into the back of the removal van that we were filling. They got it slightly wrong. The one set of wheels of the steps hit the gatepost, and I catapulted into the middle of the road. Ended up with about 5 stitches in my eye and bandage from the fingers to the elbow of my one hand. And all the director said was, I suppose that means we're going to lose an hour's filming now.
In one of these scenes, we actually had a lamppost that was made by props, and Alan Bell hated this lamppost. He thought it was wrong for the scene, and I used to say, "Oh, Alan, it's great, Alan. No, it really says that." Okay, well, leave it in the set. And what I used to do, I used to take this lamppost, I had a big estate car at the time. I used to take it outside with it, put it in my car, and shoot off to. We always had a meal after the show, so to an Indian restaurant. Take this lamppost into the restaurant and just stand it in the corner of the restaurant and not say anything. And we'd all be having our meal, and suddenly halfway through the meal, Alan would look in the corner of the restaurant, and and he'd look and he'd think, but that, it can't be. And I used to carry this lamppost all over the country.
Well, it's time for the girls' game on Crackerjack. What's your name?
Beverly. Joanne.
Beverly and Joanne.
Lynn. Heather.
Lynn and Heather. And where are you all from, Joanne?
Third Finsbury Park.
Third Finsbury Park. That's Third Finsbury Park in London. Right.
Apart from pencils or pens, one of the things that has made Crackerjack such a cult is Cabbages.
The game that I always looked forward to presenting was Double or Drop with the old Cabbages and all that stuff. But it belonged to Eamon Andrews. And Eamon took the game with him and wouldn't let us use it because he thought he might need it in some other context, which he never did. The kind of program he did didn't involve handing cabbages to people, but there you are. So we had to devise our own. I just like the ones that were messy. The messier, the better.
OK, listen, girls, this is what you've got to do. It's an idea we had to perpetuate the myth that ladies love mucking around with plates and cups and saucers and things.
I've always loved quizzes, and so that was an integral part of it. In fact, there was a programme on the telly at the beginning of this year, and we got a kid who was at the time, and they showed the old film of the game, and one of his questions was, Sir Francis Drake died on one of his 3 voyages around the world. Was it the first, the second, or the third? And this little kid, full of lovely little golden curls, said, the second. And when he came back and saw that clip on the telly, he just couldn't believe he'd been so thick. And everybody laughed at him, and I was very unkind to him at the time, and so I looked at that quiz, and I thought, my God, wasn't that horrible to that poor boy?
And it's Lynn who's the winner! You did very well indeed. You're all going to get a nice consolation prize, of course, which is a Crackerjack pencil.
Those are our most formative years, aren't they? From about 6 to about 12 is when the information you're getting, it's something that stays with you all your life, and then it's sort of shrouded in the mists of nostalgia. So the pen really, it's suddenly become an icon.
One other seemingly unrelated element made the programme complete and kept the teenagers happy: pop music. And of course, like Ed Stewart's flares and Don McLean's floral shirts, the music reflected the era. Glam.
I think we had Gary Glitter on, Sweet we had on. All the bands of the 70s were very big. And if we got them on, and they were happy to be doing it because it meant they had exposure for their latest single. But a lot of them at the time would have remembered when they used to watch Crackerjack themselves when Eamon Andrews was presenting it in the 50s.
You better watch out if you got long black hair.
Slade were always great. The kids went absolutely wild. But while the pop group was on, that was the time when we dashed into the dressing room, changed our clothes, perhaps changed our makeup, may even put on a wig and a beard, and we're then ready for the next item.
You look in his eyes, don't be surprised if you don't know what's going on behind his disguise. Nobody knows.
Every show, we would end it with a current #1 hit or whatever, with our own words. It was gruesome, but it was at least it showed that we were on the ball.
I think the kids were amazed at how well we achieved some sort of version of it. Ed used to have a few of the lyrics on the back of the chairs and that when he didn't learn his script in time.
It's funny.
As the curtain closed on another show, it also began to close on the 70s. Alan Bell.
In the 70s, television began to broaden out too much, I think. Crackerjack for young people was focused on them on a Friday at 5 to 5. And suddenly all around, children's television started to bombard them with cartoons, little silly game shows. They started to see in these cartoon films a lot of violence, and they were beginning to see adult attitudes to life. So Crackerjack, by comparison, probably did look a little bit old-fashioned to them.
Nobody told us that we weren't going to do another series. And I had a call one night from the Montreux Film and Television Festival from a journalist on the Sunday Mirror who said, your producer has just told me you're not doing it anymore. Why do you feel about that? I said, I had no idea I wasn't doing it anymore. As far as I knew, we were left at the end of the last series. See you at the next one. And the next day in the Sunday Mirror was Cracker sacked. And that's how we found out we weren't doing it anymore. He did later apologise, but it was too late. He then had booked the Crankies and he had booked Stu Francis, and we were yesterday's people.
The last one, we ended on a Christmas scene, Father Christmas coming down the chimney, and there were the decorations and the food, and it was a lovely sketch. But looking back now, you know, it would have been a very sad time because actually it was our last show.
We were going out filming, we were writing material, we were performing songs, we were working with props, we were being creative. I really don't believe that in terms of children's television, with maybe one or two exceptions, that has been replaced.
I think it was the end of the golden age of children's television, the late 70s. It was a time when people could watch television safely with their children. Adults watched Crackerjack just as much as children did, although they perhaps pretended they weren't. I don't think that exists anymore. There's so much access to television that that's gone.
As the cast of the glory years of Crackerjack went their separate ways and the 70s came to an end, we mere mortals were left with the memories of Peter Glaze's pebble glasses, Don McLean's dazzling teeth, Jan's high kicks, Ed Stewpot's albums, Pip's black boots, and Eamon's Cabbages. Others may claim they once sat in the audience at the Shepherd's Bush Theatre, and one or two might even still own a Crackerjack pencil.
I don't know that Crackerjack would work now. It sits there in its time very comfortably and would have to be updated in so many ways it would be unrecognisable, so it would no longer be around.
I think it's when you look back at the 70s that realise the qualities that we had then that were precious, and I would like to think that we still retain some of them.
The most important thing in life is to have a Crackerjack pencil and a Blue Peter bag. I wouldn't think they're valuable. They're of interest. I mean, you wouldn't take it along to Sotheby's, would you?
Dear Jan, I love Crackerjack. I want to come and see it. Please come and get me. And there was no address. And, you know, there's a little place inside me that always wonders who that little soul was. And I just, you know, feel quite sad that I was never able to fulfill that little dream.
Yeah, the wonderful Wombles of Wimbledon Common wandering off the Common and through the Shepherd's Bush Theatre. There they go. Goodbye. Thanks for coming.
Some memories indeed. It's Friday, it's 5 to 5, and it was presented by Jenny Hanley and produced by Laura Parfitt.